One night, my friend and I were driving through eastern Texas late at night. We were on our way to Austin from Oklahoma. It's a pretty long drive, 700 miles each way. Along the route, we saw what looked like a large man walking along the highway. He appeared to be carrying something in his right hand, so we thought he might have been walking back from maybe a party or something. But as we got closer, we could tell it wasn't a human, but some sort of person in a reptile suit. But they were about 7 feet tall. And the closer we got, and the more our headlights illuminated him or it, something just seemed so off. First off, this was a long stretch of road, with nothing out here. Why would somebody be walking around out here in the middle of the night in a lizard costume? But the closer we got, we could begin to see that the suit or costume this man was supposedly wearing looked very realistic. So I figured I would blow the horn, maybe get his attention. And as soon as I did, I regretted it. I say it because I don't know if it has a gender or what it was, but it turned to face us. That's when I realized this was not somebody in a costume. This was some failed science experiment or something. And I could tell that whatever was in its hand was part of a dead animal. I couldn't tell what. I want to say maybe a dead fox. This was real and definitely not a human. I am one of those people who believe in these things, but I'm writing this testimony because for some reason, something inside me told me to do so. I don't know if I'm ever going to go back there again. And ever since that experience of August 1st, 2014, I can close my eyes and still see the look on his face, at us running away and him holding something, which looked like a large animal. Now, before I even got up to him, we were doing about 80 miles an hour, and when we saw him and the headlights off in the distance, we began to slow down. Now, when he turned his face around and looked at us, his eyes were beet red. They looked like they had been lit up by fire, although it's impossible. There were no lights around. He looked like he wasn't supposed to exist or be real, like he looked like he walked off a movie set. If I can be real with you, it reminded me of a creature you'd see in one of those 2000 sci-fi movies on the Sci-Fi Channel. Not animatronic, but not in a costume either. Just very realistic. Anyway, on another occasion, my friend and I were sitting around at night, having some drinks and talking about how glad we were to not be driving through the country during this time. Who knows what might be out there lurking, waiting for us. Pretty soon, our conversation turned to more serious matters, like Bigfoot, UFOs, and paranormal, both of which we're all very interested in. All of a sudden, we heard some very loud footsteps, as if somebody was running outside. We both got up, turned off the lights to see if we could see anything, although we couldn't. I feel like from now on, I'll try and be more aware of what's happening. Not just at night, but thinking about all these things that go down during the day. Sometimes I wonder if they are coming closer to civilization, or is it me, or am I the only one who feels this way? One thing is for sure, I'll really try and never let my guard go down again, because while driving down some empty backcountry road late at night, you'll wake up sometimes with goosebumps, thinking about what might be out there. I know I'll never forget that encounter. I live about 40 minutes away from Syracuse. I had a sighting with this black snake-like creature that was upright like a man, 6 foot tall, and I saw it running into the woods when I made eye contact with it. About 2 years prior to this sighting, I saw some red eyes at night off of Buckley Road. Now, these eyes were pretty high up from the ground and very close together. At the time, I thought it was just eye shine, but after this encounter, I'm thinking it was more than that. Not that it was an eye shine, but more so what it came from. Definitely not a deer, like I may have thought it to be then. I'm sorry there's not a lot to my story, but The being in which I saw was very, very strange. To be honest, I've never shared this story with anybody before. But after listening to all your stories on how other people have seen these similar reptilian creatures, I don't really know if I'm scared anymore. It's comforting to know I'm not alone in having these strange sightings, and I'm glad to know that when you see them, it doesn't always mean you're going to get hurt. Somehow this makes me feel safer. I guess thank you for any helpful information you might have. I used to be a resident of Texas, actually, and although I'm currently in Colorado, I still have family down there. But that's not the part that concerns me, so let's go over with what does. My sister was studying at the university in Texas, and she started telling me about strange things going on at where she has lived. She's told me stories about finding large clawed footprints out in her yard and pastures, seeing strange lights at night through her windows. Especially since she kind of lives out in the country. There's no streetlights or nothing, and the weird lights kind of come and go. She's not a believer in the paranormal or UFOs, so she's pretty unconvinced, but does find the sightings and lights very strange. I've dismissed these claims as nothing more than paranoia at the time, or maybe an overactive imagination, until one time, visiting my parents, who are actually in Cedar Hill. This was in 2014, by the way. I had heard noises outside that sounded somewhat like growls at first, but as the night went on, I realized they were far too deep to be anything other than something maybe like a bear. The prints were the same prints my sister had been seeing. They looked wrong. I remember my father grabbing his flashlight, heading out to see what was making these noises, while my mother and I stayed put inside. I heard him go out there, and kind of mumbling to himself for a minute. Then it went quiet. Then he runs back in, and he describes to us seeing a creature around 5'10", covered from head to toe in dark black to green scales, looking almost like the reflection of moonlight. It had a very large muscular build, 3 sharp claws in each hand, and a mouth full of fangs. My dad was so pale. The thing apparently snarled at him and retreated back into the tree line. My dad described it like he caught it doing something, and it seemed startled. So who knows what that's all about. But I've never seen him so scared out of his mind before in my life. He told me he has no idea what that thing was, and only remembers it making a horrible, high-pitched scream before disappearing. We came to find out the next day that this creature had been seen on their property in recent days by their neighbors. My parents didn't have a camera system, so we had no way to make that proof. Of course, we didn't find out about the whole neighbor seeing this thing until later. My dad still does not know what it was, or why it would just up and visit his house like that, out of nowhere. I tried to research and look up reptiles native to Texas, which are obviously quite a few, and nothing really fit, except large lizards, such as the monitor lizards, which aren't supposed to be here anyway. So at least there's that much. But that doesn't even begin to describe what this being looked like. The interesting bit is my father described the strange lizard man creature as having a very human face, as he described it. He also made note that it looked highly intelligent. It gets more strange than that. My sister came across the story of a girl who saw some kind of creature near her home. This was also in Texas, back in 2013. She found the story on Facebook, printing out the story to show my father, so he'd know that she wasn't just making up her own stories or anything. Of course, her showing him that was before his own sighting, because he didn't believe it at the time. He brought this article over to me, and I got back home. I wasn't sure what to make of it at the time. My grandmother, who's also from Dallas, but has since moved away now, she told us that she used to see unexplained lights all the time outside of her house, and she lives in Garland. I don't know much about these reptilian entities, but if they really are real, I'd like to know why there's so much activity around Dallas. My grandmother explained to me that she used to see lights outside of her house all the time late at night. And sometimes, when she'd look out the window, there would be this large creature standing there in the street, peering in at her, as if it wanted to come in, but wouldn't. At first, this obviously terrified her, until one day she realized that whatever this thing is, it, I guess, wasn't harmful. It just stood there, glowing yellow eyes, with some sort of horrific expression, like it just wanted to scare my grandmother. She got after it. She would cuss at it, open the door and yell it, tell it to go away. It never would. It would just stand there and watch her. One time, she even called my grandfather, who was at work, and he said there was nothing out there with her. Of course, she would keep looking out the window again to see if it had gone away, but no. It would still just stand in the street, like its feet were rooted to the ground while she watched it. And this went on for years, until she finally moved away out of that house. We have no idea what that's all about. Now, when I told my grandmother about what had happened to my sister and us the one night, she got really quiet, asked me not to tell anybody else. People might think we're crazy. After all, we got some of those looks after telling a few friends what had happened. And just last week, I saw more news stories pop up on these lizard men seen outside of Dallas. I did another search online, where they described them as having green skin, bulging eyes and whatnot. My sister, upon doing some more research, even saw a YouTube video where some guy apparently got footage of these things, but I don't know about that. Supposedly happened in California. If lizardmen are real, what is happening? Is it just because of the increase in population around Dallas, or is there more something sinister happening? By the way, my father has never shown interest in cryptozoology or the paranormal, but I know he's now terrified. He believes something is stalking his house specifically. I think my sister is starting to open up. He told me he wanted to move away, ASAP. He hasn't slept right since that night, which was a while ago now, and he won't be sleeping any better now that he knows more about these things. As for me, I'm still not 100% sure what I believe, but I try to be open-minded and understand there is something going on, something more than what I can comprehend or understand. Ever since I was a small boy, I would often go hunting with my father outside of New Orleans in the swamps. One night, we were looking for game when my father found an alligator that began to appear. I couldn't tell you if alligator hunting was in any way illegal, but my dad took a shot at it, killing it right there in the spot, shooting it right between the eyes. We went over to see if we could get some meat off of it, when suddenly, from the bushes, this man-sized lizard appeared. Dark in color, having big orange eyes reminiscent to that of a cat, and reeking of decaying meat. My father instantly started shaking as he slowly placed down his shotgun. This pterodactyl-looking thing hissed at us and began to move quickly towards us. That's when we realized it was actually moving towards the dead alligator my father had just shot. My father picked up his shotgun, aimed at it, pulling the trigger, but the shotgun jammed. All of a sudden, we heard something behind us, realizing there was more of these things walking the distance towards us. The one in front had now picked up this dead alligator, began to tear its skull open, and eating the meat, like brain matter and such, in front of us. We stood there in shock. It kind of reminded me of something that had torn a turtle open, eating the fresh meat. The one behind us gained distance quickly, leaping, knocking my father over. I ran as fast as I could, hoping it wouldn't give chase to me and leave my parents alone. There was blood all over from where this thing had scratched me while leaping over. These things let my father go. I think they were so preoccupied with the dead alligator. My dad came running up behind me while these things stole his kill, disappearing off into the swamp. I don't know what they were, but I sure hope that nobody has to ever experience such a thing again. The weird thing is, this happened in the 1980s, right around the same time that boy from Skateboard Swamp saw that strange reptilian being running after him. I have no idea if they're the same thing or not. During my junior year of high school in Denver, Colorado, I had an encounter with a reptilian being. It was October 12th, 2003. While going to catch the bus for school, something odd happened that would forever change my life. While walking to the bus stop, it was around 7 a.m., when suddenly, this very tall being appears out of the woodline. Quick note, the thick brush in which this figure appeared from has kind of marshes beyond it. So I see this figure, and I can't quite make out what it is at first, but I realize whatever this figure is has scales, visible scales, and it's walking upright, just like a man would. Curious, but also very creeped out. I ignore it for a moment, try to pull out my phone, which at the time was a Nokia brick phone, only to discover the battery is dead. Upon putting my phone back in my pocket, I decide to see that I'm going to see who this is, assuming it was a person who was thinking they were clever, walking around in some sort of Halloween costume. I figured it was a little early for Halloween, but you never know. Sometimes you get those weirdos walking around. As I get closer, this thing looks like someone's nightmare. Its skin was scalier than I had first thought, and it had these little horns on top of its head and back. Not like probably what you're imagining. Not like ram horns or anything, but these little spikes, I guess if that's how I can describe them. But most impressively were the whites of its eyes. They were like slit pupils. Now, I have never been afraid of anything before, but something told me in my gut I needed to run, and now. I started running through the lot behind me, trying to get away from whatever this thing was, when suddenly a car passes by slowly. This thing didn't even seem to notice me, but turned to get a better look at the passing car. When it did, I noticed that its face was more human than I thought. When I saw its face and got a look more intently, I felt weird, beginning running faster to my house. Now, I'm not sure if this being is still there or not. It's been almost 20 years, but by the time I reached my front door, I don't think it was following me anymore. Now, I had heard of weird stuff happening in my neighborhood. Other kids whom I went to school with would always joke about what they would call as the Green Man, supposedly a tall green lizard man who stalked the marshes and woods. I always thought it was ridiculous, and I'm not saying that's what I saw, but I'm going to tell you what happened next. So I started to tell my best friends about what I had saw. Some of them believed me, some of them did not. But I think they could see how much it affected me. I mean, hell, I missed that whole day of school, and I wasn't going to dare tell my parents about what I witnessed. They would never believe me. In fact, they probably would have assumed I was on drugs or dropping LSD. The only choice I really had at the time was to share it with a few of my close friends, and primarily keeping it to myself, until all these years later, when I developed an interest in cryptozoology and the paranormal, thanks to sources like YouTube, which allow everybody and anybody to share their personal encounter stories and experiences. This is when I learned recently that I am not alone at all. In fact, I'm not crazy, because I battled with that for years, convincing myself that it was just a strong hallucination, or a bad nightmare, or a very vivid nightmare, I should say. Anyway, after hearing and learning everything that I have, and spending copious amount of hours researching and diving deep into my past, I believe that reptilians are real. Maybe not in the traditional sense, where it's humans transforming into reptile creatures, but maybe reptilian cryptids are an actual thing. I stand firm on my stance, primarily because I've seen one with my own eyes. I'm a hobbyist and a paranormal investigator. I wanted to take some time and share with you an encounter story that I've recently come to know from a man in the state of Alabama. This man had an encounter near his home with what he claims was a reptilian that he said was about 10 feet tall. And it had left 3 claw marks on the hood of his truck in a fierce showdown. It apparently tried to kill the man, but was unsuccessful. He, however, was successful in getting away. What made this the scariest of all is that there were other witnesses to this strange event. The description given by those who saw the same thing as the man were the same. The witnesses were his wife and older son. The man was terrified of what he saw that afternoon. He claimed that this thing climbed right out of the swamps, went right for him. They kind of had a brawl where he shot at this thing multiple times, trying to get it to go away. The man deeply admitted to being terrified of what he saw, and if this thing wanted to kill him, it could have easily done so. This reptilian cryptid, as described by the witness, was around 8 to 10 feet tall, grayish to green scaly skin, shark-like teeth in its mouth, large hands with 3 claws each, and long protruding spikes all over its back, with a long tail covered in barbs or thorns. Its eyes were red, with yellow-like slits for pupils. It looked extremely angry. The thing was supposedly able to climb trees and also walked around on 2 legs, like a man would, very comfortably. The witness says that the thing had a horrible, sickening smell that emitted from it. You could smell it before it was even showing up. It smelled bad. The mom and son just kept saying how horrible the smell was, and they never want to have another encounter with whatever this was. The witness was so terrified after the incident, he and his family moved away from the area. The family actually now lives in northern Florida with their relatives in order to avoid that property and area altogether. When I spoke to the witness, he claimed there was lots of swampland that surrounded that specific county. Lots of deer, lots of hunting. He said the surrounding county is very rural. A lot of people like to hunt there. He prefers living in northern Florida. He doesn't want another reptilian encounter experience. He doesn't want to be that close to those swamps, especially after his family had their very first and only encounter. Now, the man also claims that what he saw was not a human in a suit, but something else. Something dark. Something from another world. When they were being attacked, he also admits that he got a look at the creature. The man said that his wife described it exactly the way he did. It was hideous. She was hiding inside, afraid of what might happen if she stepped outside or what to do. She said, though, too, she also smelt the foul odor before she ever saw it, and even when she saw it and after it disappeared. Her description of its claws were also identical to the man. She described them as 3 claws, which resembled retractable knives coming out of each hand. It was also reported making a loud shrieking noise as it approached. She said her husband is lucky that this thing let him get away. If anyone else has had a sighting or an encounter story that you know regarding something like this, I'd appreciate any information you could share with me, because here, there is something very strange, and if we don't have photographic evidence, at least not yet, we won't be able to prove this thing exists, which we're wanting to do. So if you ever come across some, please don't hesitate to share some with me. Thank you. My sighting happened in June of 2012. My father was undergoing chemo, and I decided to bring him out into the canoe for an afternoon trip. We headed downriver to a secluded spot that we had been on once before. On our way there, my dog started acting funny, sniffing the ground and barking. That's when this large lizard thing began coming out of the trees. I began screaming, pointing at this creature, wondering what we were seeing. My father grabbed our canoe paddles, and I began screaming for him to paddle us away. But this thing kept coming towards us. Now, it was sifting quickly through the water, toward us, like some big water snake. Not swimming though, more flowing, until it was only about 10 feet away from the canoe. Its head and body were above the waterline. Then, my dad reached in his pocket for something. I hear a gunshot go off, and a spray of blood shot out of this creature. The sight made me almost vomit. Then, it just sank down under the water. I blacked out after that for some time, in complete and utter terror. The next thing I know, we are at our destination and my father is asking if I'm okay. That's when he tells me what happened. I'm shooting this creature, and then this thing disappearing underneath the water. I had fainted, I was so terrified. My dad explained to me something large had come through us and at us through the water. He wasn't sure what it was. My dad was pale. I mean, I've never seen him like that before. Now, fast forward 15 years later, and my oldest son believes he'd seen a similar creature when he was out in the forest with his own friends. He was rounding up this group of kids when he saw something that looked like a lizard. He said it stared at him for a moment, when they all became aware of what he was seeing. The creature darted off. My son, who is now 21, has never told anybody about this until I mentioned my own sighting to him, not knowing if it was the same thing. It's weird because his friends and parents had reported their strange large three-toed tracks around their house at nighttime. They would find these large feces piles as well, large scratches along the house of the trees. I can only suspect it's this thing. It's hanging around here. Look, I don't know if we somehow stumbled upon its territory or what, but I know it's here. My son has also seen it several more times since his initial sighting. The last time was not too long ago. He said this thing is beginning to get very, very violent. It's been destroying people's property, attacking and killing dogs. I'm still in shock by what we all saw those years ago, and never once did I ever believe in this kind of thing until that day. Now I know for sure it existed and will continue to exist. I know I'm going to be attacked for what I'm saying, but if there's anybody else out there that has seen this thing, let me know. We need some answers. A lot of television stations around here have been reporting on a strange creature that has been spotted and even photographed by some hunters. Everywhere from California as far as Minnesota, apparently. Most people believe that this is probably a Bigfoot, but there's a growing number in our local community that claims it might be something more, maybe like a Dogman. What is now being seen in a few photographs obtained by several hunters around here is some kind of strange hairy hominid. It appears to be tall and slender, perhaps around 6 feet. Some say this creature could very well be an undiscovered species that we've yet to name or classify. My encounter is very similar to what has been described. I know there's things going around, and there's also Dogman, known as Type 1 or Type 2. You're the expert here, not I. So maybe you can help me and determine what exactly we're seeing. My own sighting happened around the summertime of 2008 at around 10 p.m. at night. I had decided to go out for a walk through the woods, all behind my house. I noticed something moving in between the trees at first. I thought it was a deer, but it came closer and stopped abruptly, not far away from me, and then to my dismay, standing up on its hind legs, towering high above me, staring directly at my face. This was not a deer. It was black and had long hair and even longer legs. It didn't appear to have paws, but rather large hands with claws, completely covered in fur. It was a very dark shade of black, jet black, actually. The face was more human than animal-like, terrifying by the look of it. It almost kind of reminded me personally of half man, half bear. As ridiculous as that sounds, that's what it reminded me of. The mouth was a little bit larger, lots of teeth, very scary, especially the eyes. This thing stared at me directly for several minutes before I decided to slowly walk away, back inside the house, screaming for my dad. My father comes out running into the yard, thinking somebody was trying to break in, a loaded gun in his hands. He said afterwards, he saw something black standing there at the woodline, watching him. The encounter scared me so bad that I've never really returned on the backside of my house, at least not there. I'm not sure if this creature is gone by any other names. I can't exactly say it was a Dogman or a Bigfoot, but it's definitely something new and terrifying. I haven't really read much reports on it. My father's now more of a believer than he ever has, especially that night. Now, he tells me there are several other families in our town that live in our country who have had very similar eyewitness accounts of seeing these strange creatures. I guess a lot of people around here also talk about hearing growling noises being made from somewhere around in the woods, since our county is very rural and very, very woodsy. It seems like there's always places here in America that have these kind of sightings going on. This particular creature, we're not sure what it is, has become a very popular subject to talk about over the past year or so. Even, I guess, making it into some episodes of paranormal and true crime shows. It seems like people are starting to believe after seeing hard evidence that's been provided by many researchers. But it's interesting. Not everybody sees them in exactly the same way. There are some definitive similarities between all the accounts, which led me to believe it could be an undiscovered species, as opposed to being something supernatural, like a ghost or a demon, or a cryptid. I've decided that I would rather contact you. I know your expertise is needed when dealing with topics like these. I'm not sure if you've heard of this creature before, or have seen the pictures that have been posted online, but it seems like there's a lot more to the story than we're being told. Some people say it could be the form of an ape, or maybe a Bigfoot-like creature, since I guess there was one sighting here around 1993. Someone also needs to investigate further too, maybe even get in contact with researchers across the globe who are studying different types of wildlife. My dad mentioned hearing about something with an American zoologist who knows something about the cryptozoology subject. I don't remember his name off the top of my head. He's supposed to be one of the more smarter and well-known scientists, so maybe it's worth a shot for us to contact him. My father also claimed that this black creature was more active during the summer months, when people are out camping, fishing, and hiking, which may explain why there have been more sightings during this time period, rather than other times of year, where not as many people are outside. A lot of people think that this creature may even be something new that is recently brought over from Africa, using the animals that were smuggled into America or even genetically engineered by possibly a top secret government organization. I don't know how much truth there is to that, but it's definitely worth checking out. My mother very recently has expressed an interest in trying to find out more info about this subject. She had never mentioned it before. This really surprised me. She's always been pretty skeptical of these things, since they usually never end up being true, like the recent hoaxes making people think that aliens have landed somewhere in America. She thinks that if we can figure out some solid proof of our own, which will be hard, considering my father and I are the only ones that I know that have seen this thing in our circle of family, then maybe we'll have something significant enough for others to believe us. Maybe you or somebody else in your audience can help us out. It would be great if we could get to the bottom of this creature's origin. Maybe we can help solve a mystery that has been around for way too long. I had an encounter with what I think was a Dogman back in 2014. I was walking in a very wooded area across from my house. It was late November, so there were no leaves on the trees. no foliage to block my sight. It was about 3 in the morning, and you could see pretty far in the woods from where I was outside, due to the bright moonlight. I heard branches breaking to my left, and saw something strange standing there on 2 legs. That's when it noticed me, and began to run towards me at full speed. My first thoughts were maybe that somebody ran through the woods, possibly on drugs or what. Then, as it got closer, I noticed its head size and defined jawline. This was the head of a dog, or a wolf. It looked directly at me, but did not slow down, and continued to run right past me through the woods. I was terrified. I pulled out my phone, dialing 911, telling them what had just happened. They seemed very uninterested, until I told them more details about this sighting. That's when they accused me of pranking them. I tried to reassure them that this thing was still chasing me and in pursuit of me. They told me they would send somebody to check out the area, but when I arrived home, about 40 minutes later, there were no police and no sign of anything unusual having ever happened. A few years ago, I was driving south, interstate, in my hometown at night. It was close to midnight on a Saturday. I had just gotten off work at a Bass Pro Shop, about an hour or so before that. This was located in Granville, Michigan. It's quiet here for the most part where I live. Not much traffic at night. As I was driving, one thing about our interstate though, is it has 2 lanes going eastbound and westbound for each direction of travel. It's a 4-lane highway, but they only ever set up 2 lanes on either side. But there are 4 lanes to signify where the other 2 lanes would be if they were actually put in use. There is always so little traffic traveling at that hour, and you could see pretty far in the distance on both sides of the road, with very little obstructions to block your view as you're driving, which is why when something strange ran out in front of me, right as I was passing a car traveling in the opposite direction, it first caught my attention. It was night and my vision driving isn't the best. I wasn't going more than 30 miles per hour at most, and I was just about to come up on another vehicle in front of me, which was also going very slow. And then we both see this thing. I know because I saw them react. This 4-legged creature running across the 4th lane into my lane. I saw the silhouette in the distance, and then it ran right towards our vehicle. This is how I remember it looking. It was running straight towards our vehicles. Its body, from what I could tell, looked more like a large lion, if that's a silly enough description, right? The head had a large mane around it, very pointy ears, and the head was kind of canine-like, but also seemed reptilian at the same time, if that makes any sense at all. Although the head shape was more visible than the face, there was no eyes or anything visible from where I was driving. It happened all so fast that it disappeared very quickly on the other side. This caused the vehicle in front of me to slam on their brakes. Now, I drove around trying to see if I could find anything, but I couldn't. I even remember telling my brother, who was in the car with me, about it, saying if I ever saw one of those things running around here in real life, I would be done. That thing freaked me out, and it wasn't just some sort of animal. What was it? I hardly believe in Bigfoot or Sasquatch, but this was something else entirely. Like I said, it looked like some sort of large, freakish lion hybrid or something. I don't know. It reminded me of something you'd see on Animal Planet, or maybe National Geographic, or one of those shows where they get into the jungle looking for rare animals. This wasn't found anywhere else in the world, except our interstate that I know of. But my brother, who's actually really big into scary stories, found your channel and directed me to you in hopes that maybe you could kind of solve our problem. What did we see? What kind of creature did we encounter that night? Was this something more, or could this have been a hybrid or some sort? Maybe this thing was designed in a lab. But why was it so huge? I just have so many questions with not enough answers. I'm hoping you could help. This was back in 1999, and I went camping with a few of my close buddies. I know it was on a Friday, because that's when I got off work and when I went to go meet up with my friends. At the time, we were up in northern Maine, close to the Canadian border, although we had never seen any hard evidence of unusual activity. There have been some pretty weird sightings in the area over the years. The local Native American tribe in the region call this particular creature the wolf spirit. It's thought that they may worship him as an ancestor, but nobody really knows for sure. It could just be a story they tell their children to keep them from wandering around at night or something. Whatever the case, this is all taking place up near where my friends live, not far from Andre Lake. That site alone, though, has had many alleged sightings of this particular wolf spirit. That's what I'm almost sure of that we saw that day. It had been raining pretty steadily, but it was just beginning to get dark, so we decided to hop in the truck and ride out to a clearing that we had seen on an earlier trip. This was not our first rodeo. We had gone camping multiple times. This spot was way back in the woods, right beside a small stream, thick with trees and brush at all sides. This was not a typical campground spot. This was kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and it would be easy for somebody or something to hide there without ever being spotted by anybody traveling along the road that leads into it. Now, the clearing is about as big as 2 or 3 football fields put together. Perhaps even more if you include the area up near where some of the vehicles were parked. We only had 2 that weekend. There's also a dirt road that cuts through the center of it. Not really wide enough for any cars to drive down, but big enough for ATVs or some 4x4s. At the far end of the clearing is a collection of fallen trees, looking something right out of Lord of the Rings. The first thing we did was we got all set up. All 4 tents were put up, and we started a fire. Not too close by, though. You don't want your tent going up in flames if some embers get kicked around by some careless camper, or my stupid buddies. Then, we built some makeshift benches using fallen branches, which we stuck in the mud on either side of the fire pit. Things were going great, getting everything set up, until we began hearing strange noises in the woods all around us. The first time we heard it, we just thought it might be a wolf or something. It wasn't until later when I realized how unnatural the sound actually was. It's hard to describe exactly what it sounded like, almost like somebody choking but groaning. We weren't too off-put by it at first, and so we ignored it, doing our best to set up our tents and stuff. The sounds started getting more frequent. We had kept a Coleman lantern hanging from the top of one of our tents. We thought it would help keep the mosquitoes away. We hung it out by the tent, and sometimes we could see shadows moving in strange ways. We began to feel a little creeped out. I think it was around this time we realized someone or something might really be out there messing with us. I didn't have any of my necessary camping gear with me, like flashlights and knives. I was getting worried. My friend just told me to go back to where our cars were parked and get my knife, but I was reluctant to leave. He assured me we'd be fine. My friend and another one of our camping buddies had gone to go get some firewood. They had walked up to the far end of the clearing, where we were pretty confident nothing would bother them. I didn't want to leave them alone, though, but they insisted. I reached the cars and ran quickly over to mine, searching like a madman for my pack. I was just about to give up when I spotted it under the passenger seat. I turned and started jogging back in the direction of my tent. I didn't want to turn around, but I was afraid there was somebody walking right behind me, so close that they might grab me if I didn't pay attention. It was really hard not to look back, but I pushed myself and did what I could, running right into a tree head first. I fell to the ground, slid a few feet. My knee was bleeding, and I had some pretty nasty scratches. I picked myself up and made it back to camp. We had the supplies we needed, and my friends looked at me funny for running into a tree, but I explained to them that I swore something or someone was following me. The two friends of mine who had gone to get firewood at this point had come back, and while I was gone, they seemed pretty freaked. They said they could have sworn that something large was stalking them in the trees while they were gathering firewood. They were both kind of white. We stayed up for a while longer, but at some point, ultimately decided to put the fire out. Make sure all of the flashlights we had were charged before going to bed. This was the start of a very long night. After gathering in our tents, we agreed to keep the lanterns and flashlights on a high setting, just in case. My tent was closest to the cars, about 200 feet away. We wanted to make sure that nobody or nothing would come in the camp, or if someone or something did, we could see them. I laid down on my sleeping bag, turned on my flashlight, which I had positioned so that it would shine up towards the top of the tent, onto the ceiling. My friend began talking about his scouting days in high school, and how he used to camp a lot, talked to his friends about how he believed in ghosts and all that paranormal stuff. The whole time, I was trying to listen, but also keep my eyes on the woodland canopy and the woods in general. My friend began talking about how when he had a nightmare, that there was actually this werewolf stalking him to the forest while he was camping. He said that after that, he realized how much stories like that actually really scared him. And I remember my heart skipped a beat when he said that. I had to remind him about the time he swore a mountain lion was stalking us and displayed his nightmare. A noise around us broke the silence, and I shushed him. We were looking at each other, wide-eyed, as we could hear something big moving around, coming out of the woodline and close to our camp. It stopped for a moment, and then we all heard this low grunting noise. More movement, stopping. More movement, stopping. Whatever this was, or whoever it was, had to have been huge. Then, again, the sound stopped. We remained staring at each other, in complete fear, thinking some psycho is out there and is going to kill us. Then, out of nowhere, we hear this large piece of wood get thrown and smashed up against another tree. We all about jumped out of our sleeping bags, now completely terrified. Then, we start hearing more strange noises just outside the bounds of our camp. It sounded like a low growling, angry growling, and we were so scared that we shut off our lights. When that happened, I swear, it was like an invitation for this thing to start walking into our campsite. We could hear these large footsteps, long, slow steps, one by one. It seemed as though whatever was walking around, maybe 10 feet from our tent, was big enough to make the ground shake with each step. These noises were coming closer and closer. Then we heard a loud whoosh noise. It was very loud. It almost hurt my ears. I told my friends that I was just going to run fast as I could for the car. They should do whatever they wanted. They said okay, and they may not follow me. I told them it was their choice, but we had to get out of there. After that, the noises stopped, and it became quiet again, like whoever or whatever it was listening intently to us talking back and forth. I made a break for it. I jumped up, unzipped the tent, and just ran full on towards the car. I ran in the dark, not even taking my flashlight with me. I figured I would have died if I left it on. I get to the driver's side door, unlocked it, and instantly, the headlights come on and illuminate something that looked like it came from hell. About 150 feet away, coming after me in the dark, directly in front of the vehicle, was this creature that was now fully illuminated by the headlights. It looked like a werewolf if I'd ever seen one, but it also kind of resembled a baboon too. It was hideous, and it had these yellow glowing eyes. It turned and lifted up its arm to shield its face from the light. I panicked, jumped in the car, turning it on all the way, and I start honking at this thing. It slowly lowered its arm, and this thing was pissed. So it turned and ran off into the woods on the side. I roll the window down, and I start yelling at my friends. "The coast is clear. Get in the car now. We need to leave." They all listen, surprisingly, and come barreling out of the tents, running straight for me, terrified. After a few more seconds, they jump in and just literally pile in the car. We floor it, and we peel out of there as fast as possible, leaving behind our other tents, the other vehicles, all of our supplies. None of that mattered in that moment. And now we were going a good 60 miles an hour, and we could see this thing from the rear start to chase after our vehicle. It ran really strange, very strange. It ran on two legs, but it kind of dangled and wobbled. It started catching up to us, and now we were all screaming. That's when one of my friends yelled out that there's more of them coming out of the trees. More began accumulating and running after our vehicle. I think at some point or another, we lost them, but we were all scared beyond what normal fear is like. I mentioned at the beginning of this story about how some of us believe it's the wolf spirits that the natives around the area have talked about for a long time. They supposedly guard the whole area. I don't know. I'm probably wrong. I just know that it's the most terrifying experience of my life. I can't get it out of my head. I'm still recovering from the shock of it all. I've never been so scared before. I'm a believer that there may be other creatures out there like this that are still undiscovered. There's so many places here in the US where it could be, and nobody knows about it. Maybe we'll never know if those spirits were really protecting us, or if they would have killed us that night out of fear to protect their territory from intruders who may threaten their food. Following the Native American religions, they say that some of these spirits, like Skinwalkers and such, they're here to protect the territory, but others, like the skunk ape, are out to kill. Some even believe that there are creatures like the Dogman, who has no place. Whatever they were, or whatever they are, it's just one of those experiences we'll never forget. I say, we probably got lucky, and these things chased us off. We were so scared by this event that we actually never went back and grabbed our equipment. I mean, we went back and grabbed our vehicles, don't get me wrong, but we were too scared to set foot down in that clearing and grab our tents. Even though that was 21 years since this happened, by then, me and my buddies, the fear was so real, you could taste it. It was like a fear you get when you watch a scary movie, and then from out of nowhere, it hits you with these chills. It's that same tumultuous feeling. I'm positive that to this day, whatever we encountered on that night in '99 did not want us there. That sense of being threatened by these creatures is what really sticks out. For the record, nobody else ever went back out there after this had happened. And I've pondered for a long time about whether I should have shared this story. I'm not sure why or what made me finally decide to come forward and let people know that these creatures are still around. And maybe I want people to know about this so they won't go looking for them or try to discover them. Whatever the case may be, I'm glad that I told my story. Maybe it will help somebody else out there who has seen or heard about these creatures and are too scared to say anything due to ridicule. The reason why there's no names mentioned between me and my buddies is, again, I really don't want to be ridiculed or have anybody come looking for us. That was the scariest day of my life. I pray that nobody has an experience like this. Sorry again for the long story, but I thought it was important to share my piece. When I was 8 years old, my parents used to own a large piece of land that they inherited from my father's side of the family. It was sold shortly after this incident. The land, or the back half, was filled with trees, lots of oak, fir, and just general thick brush. It was untamed wilderness. I remember my parents saying it was never a place you would want to go. One beautiful fall morning, I decided to run down the path that led from our backyard over and into this area. I had done this countless times before, but my parents always warned me about going too far in there. We had coyotes and mountain lions, and due to it being so thick in brush and dense, it wasn't exactly safe for an 8-year-old boy. Anyway, for some reason, I thought nothing of it. I ran over across the field along a path far from where our house was, and up to around a cluster of trees, further than I'd ever gone before, untouched by anyone, ever, except for my family. I was then startled instantly by this intense scream coming out of nowhere, right about at my 9 o'clock. I froze. I didn't know what to do or where it came from. The whole area was a deafening silence. Nothing moved. No animals or nature were making noises, which is strange for being in the middle of nowhere, an untamed forest stretching across several acres. I slowly started moving towards the cluster of these untouched trees ahead of me, and once again, I heard another scream, and it sounded exactly like the first one, only this one was louder. I could feel this terrible feeling coming over me. It was a fear that you could never imagine. Something was out there with me. I wasn't alone. I was being watched by someone or something, and I began to move faster towards the untouched trees, as I thought it would be better to hide there. When I got to this cluster of trees, I heard it again, but this time, there were other noises with it. Falling branches, rustling, breaking. Whatever was out there was getting closer to me, and it sounded like whatever it was moving from tree to tree following me. I had no idea what to do, so I slowly backed away from the untouched trees, but not before it happened again. This time, the scream lasted for a good 5 seconds, and my whole body sunk into defeat as I realized that there was nothing I could do to stop whatever animal this was from ultimately hurting me. This wasn't a deer. This wasn't anything that I knew of from the traditional animal kingdom. I needed to get out of here, and I needed to act fast. No matter how much I wanted to, my legs would not move. The screaming stopped as quick as it started. It was dead silent, and I heard heavy footsteps moving quickly through the brush and towards me. Instantly, I fell over in fear, just waiting for whatever this thing was to make its way over to me. Once it got close enough, I could hear the sound of its heavy breathing, which was heavy and erratic, as something went wrong. It sounded like a mix between a horse, a bear, and a dog. Maybe it was just an old sick animal that had somehow gotten hurt, and maybe managed to survive out here. All these thoughts rushing through my head to try and explain away what it was that I might be experiencing, but I didn't know. I tried my best to pull myself up and ran as fast as I could. I made it over the fence and back to my house, nearly tripping and falling all along the way. Imagine that, being only 8 years of age, though I was very frightened by whatever large animal was coming after me. It sounded like I had made it angry, hence why it was coming at me so hard. As soon as I got back into the house, I told my father exactly what I was freaking out about, and he looked at me extremely strange. It tells me there's nobody out there. It's all private property. I must just be hearing things. I explained to him, even at 8 years old, I told him over there that there was some large animal chasing me, and that it seemed to be upright on 2 legs. I begged him to go look, but of course he wouldn't even entertain it. I had convinced myself there was nothing out in the woods that night. Now, flash forward to about a year later, and we had moved. I think at some point or another, my own father had an encounter with something like I did, because during the winter, for a short while I went to go spend some time away with my grandparents, he seemed different afterwards. He stopped going outside by his shed, which bordered the thickness of the land. He quit taking me out there back in the winter to go play. Sometimes, I think he saw something, but it seems that he was eager to get us to move out of there afterwards. We ended up actually moving that spring, and even to this day, my father refuses to talk about it and acts like that story of mine I just shared never happened. I'm not much of a believer in cryptids. but I do feel that whatever this was could have been some sort of large lizard. Here's my story. I believe I came up to a close encounter with what I would say is a lizard man. It was in my hometown of Amarillo, Texas. I'm 25 years old, male, from the US. I currently work at Walmart as a manager, and have been for about 5 years now. Coming home from work late at night one evening, I reside next to a large apartment complex. There's a few ponds around it, lots of trees, and on this night, I noticed something moving very fast toward the building. It was springtime, and all this time of year, everything is coming out in full bloom. As I'm pulling closer, that's when I notice movement from something very large, I think coming out by one of the ponds closer to my house. I had a good view of it. I was about 50 yards from this thing. Now, it looked like a very large lizard man, kind of running on all fours. It was running impossibly fast across the pavement toward the building and the swimming pool area. The thing ran on its hind legs, after running on 4, and quickly shifted to 2, halfway through the road. It had a very thin body, with short, stubby front arms, but longer, skinny back legs. The feet appeared to be webbed, kind of like a duck would, and they were also scaled, and it had a long, slender tail that it dragged behind it. I would say lizard man, but I don't know what it was. It looked to be about maybe 6 feet high, and it had cat-like eyes. They looked bright yellow. I felt very uneasy by watching it. I'm not much of a believer, but the sighting changed for me. There's no way this was a person playing Halloween. I think that's impossible. I looked around and saw the lizard man running away from me, just before it dove into the night, not to be seen again. It was a really eerie feeling, knowing that there was something else out there that I did not know anything about. I wasn't alone, like ever. This experience changed me, and changed my habits of how I live when I got home. So, if you see something, don't be afraid to report it. This could happen to anybody. I'm even weird about how I use the term lizard man, because I know it sounds so ridiculous, but that's exactly what it looked like. As a matter of fact, this thing looked like it stepped off the Hollywood stage of a horror movie. I mean, that's just how realistic this thing looked. Creepy. Now, as far as I know, there are no other reports or stories by anyone that I've heard of that has heard about this. I know Bigfoot is a thing, but I've never seen one, or any of those. However, this lizard man phenomenon is something different. I'll try and spend some time searching around and see if I can't maybe find any more stories. I'm sure I'm not the only one to have seen this thing. I just hope I don't ever have to see it again. One evening, I was driving home from work. My wife was sitting in the passenger seat of my car. We were on our way to pick up a pizza, as we both had a late night of work. Suddenly, this huge creature in the form of a gigantic lizard reptile thing leapt out onto the highway and began running towards our car. We slam on the brakes, and it runs right past us. I think I just reacted, because most people would floor it. We got a brief look at it before it disappeared into the bush on the other side of the road. We were both in total shock for about 5 minutes before we pulled back onto the highway. We did make it back home, telling our kids what we had just seen, and that it was really scary, but we didn't tell them what exactly we thought it was. Since we were both in shock, we tried to shoot ideas of what we think it could have been. My wife was crying, she was so scared. And of course, I too was terrified. I'm not sure what it was, but I know that it wasn't a bear, or a mountain lion, or a deer, or a man. I've never in my life heard or seen anything about upright walking reptiles that are native to the United States. I've never heard of in my life any sort of reptile that could have fit this description. It's like it was something from outer space. The next morning, I started frantically looking up information on reptiles when I came across something called a cryptid. Apparently, There are reptilian cryptids, if I'm saying that right, that have been sighted a lot in this part of Texas for years now. I had no idea. It really got me thinking about how crazy this world really is, and all the things we don't know. I started doing research into the creature, and found some more interesting things. I guess this is a kind of alien, and is often referred to as a reptilian. On average, they're about 7 to 9 feet tall and walk upright, which is actually pretty close to what we saw. It has been known to walk around on 4 legs as well. It's often dark and scaly. The creature is also said to be sometimes spotted with horns, large nostrils, and eyes like a snake. We didn't really see the face much, but the head kind of reminded me of a lizard. Anyway, this thing is reported to apparently attack people, or lie in wait, when it feels threatened. I guess there have been many eyewitnesses, in the southern states especially, for years now. Other than that night, I have never encountered one before. I was terrified at first, but beginning to think it's just another ghost story, like the ghost of St. Augustine, where it's a woman in white. I don't know. The whole thing is just so confusing. I don't talk about what happened much because people just won't believe me. I haven't encountered a cryptid that is similar to those described in this article. I'm not sure what it is or what it was, but it seemed, again, like something from outer space. I think that makes more sense to me than what we had encountered. I think it's a strange alien being. I don't talk about this with anyone else, because who else is going to believe me and my wife? So I'm thankful I was able to reach out to you from this article. It's been really eye-opening to find out about all these cryptid creatures. I'm still not sure what we saw, but it makes sense that it was an alien. I don't want to scare people or anything. I just wanted to share my story and let people know they're not alone in seeing these creatures out there, if they do. This encounter story happened on November 22nd, 2013. Rural Indiana. This person was going into the forest to investigate some strange noises that they had heard. That day, they had been standing at the edge of a forest near the house. Apparently chilly but sunny, and there were puffy clouds and a bright blue sky. They liked being outside on a nice fall day like this, so they weren't planning on going back inside for a while. There was just too much to do. So they were working on practicing their archery skills with some new arrows that they had bought earlier, when suddenly, something strange interrupted them. Through the trees, they heard an odd sound that resembled several things at once. It seemed to be part screeching bird, part human shriek, part banshee scream. And although none of those are actually very similar sounds in themselves, all of them were in there together. Listening carefully, it seemed to be coming up from the mountain. So they went around the corner of the forest and began to climb up this small rocky slope. When they were approaching the source of the noise, it was growing louder and more distant. Suddenly, they came over this small rise in the landscape and stopped short. There stood a strange creature that was reported to be about 12 feet tall. It had this nasty scaly skin, yellow eyes that reflected back. Its head looked like that of an alligator, only bigger. It turned to this person, noticing them right away, and although they made eye contact, it started to hypnotize them, or so the person would describe. In fact, this individual describes being kind of lured towards up here, which is why they came this area, climbed up the rocky slope, and to see this thing. The oddest thing of all, instead of running away though, they found themselves moving closer and closer to it, while it moved in their direction. Before they ever met up, there was one more very strange thing that occurred. They appeared to be in a hypnotic state, being lured ever closer to this strange creature. They walked forward, hypnotized, and when they got to about 8 or 9 feet from this thing, they were convinced this creature was going to kill them. They don't know what happened, but something in their minds snapped, and the trance was broken. They turned around to run, but it was too late. Their legs would not work, so they just stood there, Well, this creature came closer and closer. There were 2 rows of teeth they reported in its mouth, like that of a shark. But then, just as it lunged and was about to bite, it started letting out this horrendous scream. They would later learn that it was because, or so they believed, that the chewing tobacco was such a strong odor, it hated the smell. It's a very odd conclusion, but it's the only thing that this witness could possibly think of. As it got closer, it kind of made a face like it got a whiff of something he didn't like. This eyewitness had a large dip in, as well as a can of chew in their coat pocket when this happened. So, that's the only evidence we can really guess or go by. They were not going to risk it. They took their chance and fled as fast as possible to escape. Absolutely terrified by what they saw. Nothing like this had ever happened to them before, and they didn't know what to do. They don't really know what it was. They don't want to see it again. They were successful in making their way back to the truck and driving themselves home without a problem. They're not sure what they saw, but all they could say is it was very scary. They will say this, though. They've had friends that have gone out in these parts and have had very similar sightings and experiences. It's possible, too, that they saw the thing that this person described. Now, I'm going to go ahead and end this encounter story. This story was shared to me by a family relative. I'm just passing it along. While I won't mention their blood relation to me, they are a close relative, and they wish to remain anonymous, and asked me if I could share their story. They're not too good at typing, so they told it to me by ear and had me do this for them. They're big listeners of your show, and they appreciate all the episodes you put out. They want to give you a big thank you. And hopefully, just hopefully, you get to read this to your audience. This was not that long ago, pre-COVID. I was out hunting in the woods with my good friend Mike, or so we'll call him, and we decided to take a break on a fallen tree. I saw something ever so briefly coming through the trees, which caught my eye, so I pointed at it, trying to tell Mike what I'd seen. He looked where I pointed but said he didn't see anything. But then his mouth fell open. He cried out as we watched this thing move stealthily toward us. Then we could see it. It had red eyes, scales, and it kind of looked like an upright walking alligator. Its hands were very similar to that too, having 4 to 5 large claws on each hand. You could believe that by seeing something like this, nobody would believe us, and we were completely terrified. I'm surprised I didn't soil my pants. We both just reacted, turned up, and ran like hell. This thing started chasing us. All the while, if you were able to see my face, you would have seen the pure terror on it. I've never been that scared before. It was a primal level of fear. Me and Mike just kept running, not even stopping once, until about half an hour later, when we were still running, or so I like to believe. I say that because I lost track of time, but I just remember running and running and running, and this thing following us and not stopping. It was relentless. I do remember at one point Mike tripping and falling, and I had to go back and pick him up, although I couldn't see what this thing was. But we're asking, what was that thing? As he was shouting with fear in his voice. We had just straight up witnessed something out of a horror movie. We got out of there, but we still talk about it now and then. I think we're convinced that we must have stumbled upon this thing's territory at some point. I mean, we've never imagined something like this ever before. The section of woods we went out to is where we've gone and gallivanted many times before, from hunting to just having a bonfire. I don't know where this thing came from, where it lives, and I don't care. I don't want to see it again. This was back in October of 2017. I saw some strange creatures. I was at my uncle's house in the backyard with my parents and a few cousins. My cousin had this spinning wheel thingy that you could either ride or push around. I got on it, and while going around, I heard some dogs barking in the distance. Not unusual, as there were Doberman pinschers in the dog pen nearby. But after a while of riding around, I started hearing something else too, like an animal rustling through leaves or grass. The thing was getting closer to me, but all else remained quiet besides the animals outside. Suddenly, they stopped making noise, which made me freeze in my spot on the wheel for a second, before checking to see if anybody else noticed anything unusual. That was when I noticed I had ridden out of the yard and was a lot closer to the woods at the edge of the property than I had thought. I could still very visibly see the rest of the family, who all appeared to have not even seen that I wasn't right there. My dad and uncle were taking care of the grill. My aunt and mother busy setting up the table, and my cousins were just messing about with a Nerf gun. Even though I could have just yelled and they would have been able to hear me, their voices seemed really far away. I mean, even the dogs from down the street seemed far more quiet. I felt this weird urge to scream and run, but also like I was rooted to the spot, frozen and could not move, just stare into the tall grass that just moments before had been rustling, and now silent and still. I knew instinctively there was something there. The best way I can describe it, it would be like when you're underwater. That kind of muffled sound where you know stuff is going on around you, but you can't quite make it out. It sounded almost like there were low voices coming from the tall grass. We'd been warned not to play in that grass in this particular spot that leads into the woods behind my uncle's house, mainly because of snakes. But this did not sound like slithering or hissing. Then, the voice-like noise stopped, and there was more rustling again, like something sure as hell was moving in there. Thankfully, sounding like it was heading back into the trees, and not towards I. But I still just waited, feeling unable to move. To this day, I am unable to tell you exactly what emerged from that grass and crawled into the woods. There were two of them, both very similar in size. The best example of what they should have been, I guess, would be a deer. They looked like some sort of deer, but wrong. Deer gone wrong, horribly disfigured or mutated. That's literally the best way to describe what they were. And no, they moved like they weren't used to being on four legs. They acted uncomfortable, awkward, stilted and stunted. I thought maybe those were the injured or deformed. But in all honesty, they just looked wrong. As soon as they disappeared back into the woods, I felt like a release, and all of a sudden, all the sounds from around me came back clear, and I heard and saw my mother call and waving at me, and telling me the hot dogs were now ready, and to come wash up. I never told them at all what I saw, because frankly, I don't know. And also, they probably wouldn't believe me if I did. Just in case they had, I want to keep thinking I imagine it. It's really the only way I can sleep at night. But I have a feeling deep down what I saw is more real than everything around me. This was long before I knew what a skinwalker was. But one time when I was 17, I was walking home from high school when I just got this discernible feeling I was being watched by something, not someone. I looked around, following my instincts. I saw nothing but a bush moving out in the distance, as if something was hiding behind it. It had to be a skinwalker. And that same year, my grandmother had had a ton of encounters with these beings, and they were constantly following her around, which meant that I too was now a target for these same beings. I had gotten so used to seeing them, I wasn't just afraid, I was always afraid. Of course, The thing with Skinwalkers is that unless you know about them, know what to look for, you never even knew they existed, which is the entire point. They can possess, if that is the right word, anyone or anything. I live in constant fear. I wish there was some sort of test, like you see in the movies with demons. You know, throwing holy water at them, and if they sizzle, you kinda know. But there is nothing like that for a skinwalker. And even if there was, I can't just walk about pouring holy water over people, just in case. I think you kinda understand. But I guess once you know what you're looking for, you can tell. It's often the giveaway is the eyes. The way they move, and it seems wrong. Especially if they are walking in animal form. Ever seen a dog that looked overly intelligent? A deer or coyote that didn't walk quite right, as if it wasn't used to being on 4 legs? How about a person in the street? Someone you've never seen before, and yet something seemed both off and yet familiar. Despite never having laid eyes on them before, they seem to turn up several times throughout your day, and yet you may have traveled miles. I've had all of those things. One of the worst and most terrifying experiences was when I was followed for almost an entire day by what I am sure was one person using many different people to walk in. How could I tell? How did I know that somebody else was using all these different people to follow me around? Their eyes and smile, every single one of those very different people. From young, old, male, female, they all had that same dead look in their eyes. That same awful smile. So yeah, I'm always afraid. I'm always glancing over my shoulder, looking in the dark corners and shadows. You would be constantly on edge too if you have ever seen a regular-looking dog smirk at you, smile in only a way that a human could possibly do, as if a human was trying to control every feature. And you want to know the worst thing? What is even worse than literally knowing if people around you are actually them or something else? That is the worst. Why are they following me? If the original target, for want of a better word, was my grandmother, who is the only person who truly believes, why did they jump from her to me? Or is more my family under attack? What do they want? I just can't find the right answers, and I don't know who to talk to. Or at least who would be willing to talk to me about this. I just want to know why they won't leave me alone. I don't want to spend my entire life being afraid, always looking behind me, never trusting anybody. It's ruined friendships, relationships. Is that what they want? I'm hoping maybe, just maybe, you or somebody can send me in the right direction, or at least tell me that I'm not alone and I can leave them somehow. I just want a normal life again. Is that too much to ask? Can you help me? When my grandfather died when I was just at the tender age of 11, he left behind an old journal that had some crazy stories written inside of it about his time on the Navajo reservation back when he was much younger. He had many written stories about these creatures called skinwalkers. Of course, I didn't believe any of them. But after what happened the other day, I'm beginning to think that these creatures are real. Not all the stories in the journal were necessarily new to me. I had heard some of the encounters before, but usually, if grandfather began to tell one, my mom would cut him off and give him the look. Sure, she wanted us to know about it and embrace our heritage, but also, she didn't want us constantly looking over our shoulders, wondering if that dog, horse, or whatever it was really just an animal. One of the stories he had managed to sneak was that one of an old lady who seemed to be able to travel remarkably quick, especially for somebody with such advanced years, who was often spotted deep in the woods whilst others were hunting, only then to be found on the reserve an impossibly short time later. To our young minds, That didn't seem particularly scary. More wondrous. She was just a little old lady. Maybe with magical powers of speed. Super granny, right? But the things grandfather wrote down were far more detailed and far more frightening, depicting these people as black witches with evil intent. Not just old ladies who magically appeared in places too quickly, just to mess with others. These stories involved murder and malice, and if true, would be the stuff of nightmares. Even at 11, when I was just beginning to read more horror and stay up later to catch nighttime movies, I still didn't believe. I'm sure, to a young kid, say 5 or 6, an old lady could be magical. But to an 11-year-old, witches and these powers grandfather wrote about couldn't be real. I thought that for the next 10 years. Until the other day. Funnily enough, it happened back at the family home. I'd moved away a couple of years before, but still visited fairly regularly, and was home for a birthday, actually. Since all of us had moved out, my parents had gotten a dog and wanting some fresh air, and despite it being fairly late in the evening, I'd volunteered to take her for a walk. We headed out into the woods behind the house, where we'd play for hours as kids, and I'd let her run around for a while, all whilst I just enjoyed the clean air. After only a few minutes, I heard her whimpering. My first thought was that she'd maybe stood on a thorn or something. It was dark, but there was still just enough light to see that she was on the floor, shaking and whining, which was odd, since she'll usually pick a fight with anybody, and is fiercely protective. I'd never seen her in this submissive stance before. Then, I saw why. A pair of eyes were glowing through the tree line. It was unnerving to say the least, as the eyes appeared to look human, but were low down like animal level, and I could just about make out the shape of a large dog, more like a wolf. This creature didn't make a noise, didn't bark, growl, nothing. It was stood and watched, and then it seemed to stand up. I don't mean like a dog when it begs. I mean it stood up like a man. My dog yelped, ran over to me, behind my legs, still shaking. I've seen her square up to the other dogs way bigger than her, but she was terrified. I bent down to comfort her, and when I looked again, it was gone. She barked once, running all the way back to the house, not bothering to wait for me, and I could tell you, I was right behind her. I had just thrown another log onto the fire, and my friend had gone quiet. We both noticed we were not alone. A hush fell over us as we looked around, wondering what it could be. We noticed a figure in the dark on our right side, and just then, my friend yelled out. We didn't realize it until later that we had even seen something move from behind us to our left too. But for now, we thought that maybe whatever it was might have been coming closer. The fire in front of us flickered a bright orange and yellow all across the trees, while the night sky above us threw down only stars and darkness. We sat there for what seemed like 3 hours, waiting for something to happen, when suddenly, my friend stood up and pointing into the air, shouting, "What is that?" pointing at a tall black shadow between the trees close by. I stood up slowly and tried to imagine what it could possibly be. What innocent and plausible explanation I could think of. This wasn't as terrifying as it seemed. But as the figure came closer, I knew there was nothing innocent about it. There was no logical and obvious reasons for it being there. Looking back, the best way I can describe it would be that it looked like one of those inflatable balloon people. Those giant, long, thin people that stretched out arms and legs. Only, while those seemed to be fun and inviting, This long outstretched shadow person, or whatever it was, seemed to literally ooze with evil intent. I, crab walked backwards, desperately wanting to get my feet and run, but my body refusing to do so as I asked. I'm not afraid to say I was completely petrified. My buddy was luckier, and once the thing had started moving, so had he, and I heard the roar of an engine and understood he made it to the truck, knowing that I might end up stranded here with this thing. That alone gave me the boost I needed to get my feet, but for a moment, I was still frozen to the spot, standing but unable to run. And that was when it moved faster than it should have been possible and was right in front of me within seconds. All I could think and feel was that I was going to die. I was so cold, and there was this awful stink. I could hardly breathe, and when I had made myself open my eyes, since I had practically screwed them shut tight with fear, I realized the dark mass was see-through, and I could make out the fire behind and through it. I don't know what would have happened then if my buddy hadn't blasted the truck horn, but it snapped me out of whatever trance I was in, and I ran faster than I ever had before, going towards the beams from the headlamps of the truck. We got out of there and didn't even bother to return for our stuff. We had been hiking for days at this point, and after running from that thing, we were exhausted. We came into a small clearing, just sitting there for a while. We could have stared at the tall trees that surrounded us forever if we didn't hear something in the woods growling at us. It was long and low, and animal-like. We were still catching our breath when it started again, louder and closer this time. Whatever made that sound had been watching us for some time. Who knows how much longer it would stay unseen. I threw on my pack quickly, and my friend already having his on ready to go from taking a quick break. When he turned around to see me struggling with mine, he quickly offered to take most of it off me, which I gladly accepted without hesitation. I grabbed the knife out of my pocket and slowly stood at the ready, in case this thing would come back for us. We weren't amateurs or city boys looking for adventure, ending up well out at our death. We had been hiking, camping, hunting, you name it, for years. We were what you would call experienced. Therefore, we knew this wasn't a bear, or a cougar, or some sort of regular mountain animal. This thing was tracking us, using stealth and smarts like a human, except for the speed and agility that it seemed to be using to follow us and remain so far unseen. And that growl. Up until then, we heard only it moving through the trees and the quick, heavy breathing, or more like panting. Hearing that low, guttural growl now made my blood run cold. It was angry. That was the kind of noise my dog made when it felt threatened. God, I wished right then that we would have brought the dogs with us. Right at that moment, stood back to back, me with a knife, and my friend, a large stick he'd found lying on the ground. We were so completely exhausted, we barely had any energy left to put up a fight. The thing made a noise again. This time, however, rather than the low growl, it was more like a howl, telling us it was ready to make a move. And sure enough, the trees and long grass where it was hiding started shaking, and I made a split-second decision to throw the knife in that direction, like I was some sort of circus performer knife thrower. Whatever gods were on our side right then must have believed in us enough. I hit the mark, and we heard a high-pitched scream of what seemed to be pain. Before I had a chance to recover, we ran. We ran faster than ever before, somehow pushing through the exhaustion. I think pure fear giving us the adrenaline we needed for energy, and we made it back to base camp. One of our friends did not believe us, thought we were being dramatic and making stuff up. So we went back and followed the trail. We refused to join him. When he saw him again a few days later, he changed his mind. He'd found my knife on the ground and a large area of dried blood, and some pure white hair. Not fur, but hair. Safe to say, we haven't been back there since. I swear, I saw some sort of dark apparition in the woods. I'll tell you about it. I was walking home from a night out with some friends. My house is roughly a 25-minute walk through deep woods at the end of my street. I was at a point where I had about 10 minutes left. So I figured I would speed up a little bit and see if I can make it home in 15, since I enjoy going on long walks anyway. It was almost midnight, so there really wasn't anybody else outside but me and the occasional night dog walker. When I got about halfway through the woods, which is where this weird feeling began creeping over me, I ended up running most of the way back to my house. Once I made it to the last street before my own, suddenly everything felt eerie quiet, except for crickets chirping randomly here and there. Something was following me, and it was in the woodline. It was almost pitch black. There was very little light coming from the moon, and almost no street lamps, until you got closer to the houses. My cell was almost dead, and had gone into battery saving mode, so although I had the light app on, it was practically useless. You know that feeling you get sometimes, where you are sure you are being followed, and when you finally get the courage to spin around, there is just another random person heading back from the store or listening to music, completely oblivious to any anxiety they might have caused you. I had that feeling now, but tenfold. I couldn't think of any innocent reason to find someone trailing behind me, minding their own business at midnight in the dark. Every single Hollywood horror movie cliche seemed to apply. It suddenly got super cold. It was almost silent when there should have been all sorts of critters about. And the very second I finally willed myself to turn around, my phone died completely. If this had been Halloween Part 75 or however many there are, I would have been a goner for sure. No, I didn't see Michael Myers when I turned, but there was something there. It was hard to see, of course, since there was almost no light, but yet I could clearly make out a solid dark mass. Something far bigger than a person, and also appeared to be floating. I stood there, rooted to this spot, for what seemed like an eternity, but judging by the time on my watch when I finally got home, must have only been a few seconds. I watched in absolute dread as this mass seemed to get bigger. Then something in my brain just yelled, "Run," and I did. I can't tell you what it was, as I have no idea, but whatever I saw that night, it wasn't right. It should not have been there. It wasn't natural, and it sure as hell wasn't there to make friends with me. I know monsters exist. I saw one myself one day while out helping my father, who was felling a tree. I was watching from a distance, and in one moment of inattention, I saw something appear on the side of a tree opposite of me. It was not a human figure, but its shape suggested it might be humanoid. Anyway, as soon as I noticed this thing, it lunged towards my father. For clarification, this happened around 10 years ago. My dad has always been a big guy, really strong, and I was a skinny kid, around 12 or 13. Although I was used to helping out, my father had told me to take a step back, as he worked on a particular part of the tree. At this point, we were a bit further into the woods than we would usually have been, on account of there having been a storm and a lot of trees that had been damaged. Dad wanted this particular wood to work on, so we'd gone further in to make sure we found just what he was needing. Being in Pennsylvania, there are also a lot of caves and caverns out here in the woods, as well as huge expanses of trees. I know better than to mess around down there. No, that I ever thought of anything weird might happen, but I've also seen what a nasty snake or spider bite can do. I've heard rumors of there being huge drops in the caves, and no way of pulling yourself back out. That was the closest I'd ever been to them for years, and I wonder now, looking back, if the thing I saw maybe lived down there. What made it come out and go after my dad, I have no idea. Maybe that tree meant something. Maybe the sound awoke it. After, when Father was recovered, although we never told no one else, and we never went back down that far, he said he thought maybe the tree was marking a grave or something. This thing was territorial. Anyway, I was just standing there when this thing screeched and appeared to slash at my father, using its arm and what looked like these long claws, so sharp they cut straight through his shirt, tearing his arm open. He was successful in managing to swing back at it with an axe in his other hand, and whatever this thing was, met with axe. It screeched much louder and ran off. Well, I say ran, but it sort of skittered about, like a giant spider that was pale and humanoid, and on two legs. It would be really hard for me to tell you exactly what it looked like. It was tall, but no more taller than my father. Really pale, almost like an albino. Completely hairless, having very long arms and legs. The head was almost featureless. Large black eyes. No nose or really much of a mouth that I could see. Just holes. We ran like hell back to the house, cleaned up my dad's arm. He didn't want to go to the doctor. I mean, what would we tell them happened? It took ages for those gashes to heal, and he had an awful fever for days following. So he just slept for hours. So yeah, I know for sure there are monsters out there. And if something like this exists, just what else is lurking about in the forests? June 5th, 2018. This is the date that I saw a strange creature. I simply can't quite identify what it was. I'd like to start by saying that I'm a very skeptical person, but can also be quite open-minded. So, I would like for this not to be taken as a joke, or something of the sort. To start off, I sent my friend out to his truck for gas and snacks at roughly 11 p.m. on this day. I was extremely tired and wanted to pass out. I figured getting snacks was a good way to do so. Only problem, I cannot fall asleep. Shortly after he left, a loud thumping noise began coming from the outside of my house, which very much so startled me. Since my family lived in the country, we always had critters and other animals outside. I wasn't too sure what it could have been. I jumped up to look outside my window. It was dark, but I could not see much. And then I see this pale figure out in the distance. It was very large in size and looked dark, but pale at the same time. I can only describe it as being very tall, with somewhat of a weird round shape to it. I watched this figure for about 30 seconds, during which time it seemed to be looking around for something before running on two legs towards my house. I panicked. This thing was larger than any man I'd ever seen, and did I mention it was large? I quickly ducked down under my window, hoping it had not seen me. I peeked back up a few seconds later and saw that it was on my porch. I pulled out my phone to take pictures, but my phone refused to focus on this thing. It was strange looking, tall, and very pale white. It had a very bizarre looking head and kept making these strange noises. This creature, whatever it was, began slowly walking around my house. It had a very strange gait, like it was drunk or something. It walked very close to the house and occasionally would stop to look into the windows. I stayed silent, hoping this thing would not see me. I hid at just the right spot, so it never saw me, but I saw it, and I'll never forget its face. It reminded me of how a goblin would look. After looking around for a few minutes, this being seemed to just disappear. I wasn't sure if it had left, so I stayed quiet and hid even longer. When I finally made myself move, I went to my car and grabbed my gun. I live in New Mexico, so we're allowed to carry guns. After walking outside with the gun in tow, I didn't see anything. I figured it had just left. I mean, I hadn't heard any noises for a while, so I decided to go back inside. After getting up the courage to enter my own house, I went in and took some time to think about what happened. After sitting around for a whole 15 minutes, thinking about what all took place, I just looked outside again to see if whatever that thing was could still be around. I heard a noise coming from outside, but it was actually my friend pulling back up from the store. He comes in and told me about what he had seen. I had seen the same thing. I guess he saw it while coming back, and he didn't think I was completely crazy or just seeing things. I explained to him that this was not a person or any animal I have ever seen. We don't know what it was, but there's no way that it was anything human. Like I said, I'm very skeptical and open-minded, but this was something else entirely. This happened on a very sunny morning, out on the water, with the sun's beautiful rays beaming down. I reflected upon how little we know about this world, and how much more there is to discover. It makes me wonder if this creature had anything to do with my thoughts that day. As I rode across the lake surrounded by lush trees, I just felt alone in the world. My dog, who was lying down near my feet, began to act strangely and seemed on high alert. Then I saw it. A singular creature ran past me at full speed and was gone before I could even comprehend what had just happened. In that brief moment, I witnessed an upright animal that stood on its hind legs, almost like a human, only with grayish-brown fur all over, except for its face, which seemed to be white or gray in color. Whatever creature this was ran just inside the tree line of the right where I was at, and my dog was now going crazy. Then this thing sticks its head out of the trees and looks directly at me. I could see long pointy ears, glowing red eyes, a snout similar to an elk or moose, and a tan head. It was not like any animal I had ever seen before. However, what startled me the most was that it seemed to have facial features of a human being, like a short, stocky man. It stood about 6 feet tall from what I could make out of its body, while it was crouched down by the tree line with its head sticking out at me. It appeared canine looking, but very human-like as well. I, scared completely out of my wits. This thing lets out this small grin on its face, like it had just found prey that it was going to devour. It's like we had just encountered some sort of freak werewolf creature, or something. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. I turned my boat around and began rowing as fast as I could, with the creature still staring at me from the shoreline. Once I was far enough away from these woods, which seemed to be full of a mysterious presence that day, I noticed how strange it was that this thing did not go out into the water to pursue us. In fact, when I turned around to see it, if it was still there, it was actually gone. As I rode back to the dock, my dog, who was sitting near me when all this occurred, appeared traumatized by what she had seen. She would not even look at the water or even go near it again for several days after that. We have never seen anything like it before or since, and I don't think we ever will. I live in the woods of upstate New York. Used to stay in a small cabin on the bank of a small creek. I heard a strange noise outside and went to investigate. I look up and saw a very strange creature flying over the creek. Honestly, I thought it was a person with wings at first, but I'm not sure that the height of it was from my perspective. The span of its wings looked to be about the size of a full-grown man. It appeared to have very broad shoulders, long arms, similar like that of an ape, yet it had a very human-like face. It appeared to have fur, or fur-like feathers, covering its body, and was dark brown in color. It flew over the creek and disappeared off into the trees. I have never heard or seen anything like this before, and I thought I should share my story with you. I tried doing some research and looking into what this could have possibly been, but I'm not too sure. It definitely was not a bird, and I don't believe it was like a dinosaur or anything. Either due to the fact that he didn't flap his wings once when flying, it appeared to glide at a constant speed and direction without flapping its wings and was moving fairly quickly. There are stories all over the world of a man-bird and man-bat type creature, but none of them are as well established in local folklore as that of the birdman. There's a county in northern Michigan, Delta County I believe, where for years reports have been made of a creature with a man's body and an eagle's head. This beast has been seen along Lake Superior for generations, along with the infamous canine cryptid known as the Michigan Dogman. Then, there's the possibility it was what's known as a bat squatch, judging by its appearance. As far as I'm aware of, bat squatches are unknown, and there have been few to little reports of them. I'm not sure what it was, but one thing is certain. Whatever it was not some sort of ordinary bird or animal. Even the Chippewa Indians had their own tales of large flying hairy creatures that would swoop down and abduct lone wanderers from the villages. The thunderbird, of course, is a mythical creature with roots in many northern Native American tribes, and has been described as this enormous bird with great wings outstretched. A very large creature that would attack people and take them away, never to be seen again. It can't be a coincidence that this description fits the thunderbird, mothman, or bat squatch. But while there seem to be many flying cryptid descriptions and sightings, none of them 100% quite fit exactly what was seen that day. I was driving through New Mexico later on in the evening. It was around 11 p.m. because the sun had already gone down. I was driving through a remote area on a long straight road that stretched for miles and miles ahead of me. The road's shoulder was narrow, and there weren't any cars on the road, so it was safe to go at normal speeds of 55 to 60 miles an hour. Suddenly, on my left and slightly ahead of me, I saw a coyote standing in the middle of the road. But this wasn't any normal coyote. It was an upright, walking coyote with a strange face that had only one eye. I slowed down to around 40 miles an hour when I saw it, then braked when I got close. As I passed it, however, the coyote quickly shot across the road and stood on the other side. Then, it continued to stare at me as I passed, then turned around and ran off into the desert shrub that grew alongside the road. It left such a strong impression on my mind that even today, I still remember it vividly. I also had my windows rolled down and a foul odor lingered behind. I can't describe it. It just stunk badly. There were many types of werewolf sightings. Some people report seeing full-fledged werewolves, while others say they saw a strange person that transformed into a wolf. There are even those who claim to have seen half-human creatures called were-hybrids. As for me, I'd like to talk about something different from all the other reports out there. In my opinion, a werewolf is actually a wolf or the spirit of a wolf that possesses the body of a human. The Native American Indians have many legends about these werewolves. Sometimes they are referred to as Skinwalkers, a person who could shapeshift into an animal at will and who uses the ability to help mankind, or for evil. According to one legend, the human body is nothing more than a tool that allows man to possess many things, such as looks. It's possible that it is also a tool for possessing animal characteristics in order to be able to fulfill special tasks. These legends and stories about werewolves have been passed down from generation to generation among many Native Americans. But many of these stories are also present in other cultures all around the world and go back centuries. However, while I don't necessarily believe that what I saw was exactly a werewolf by any stretch of the means, I believe it could have been a skinwalker of some kind, based on its appearance and how it seemed to not want to have been seen. I've thought for years about how that coyote creature was a strange thing. Coyotes are mostly active at night, so maybe what I saw was actually just a coyote. But what about it being upright and the strong odor it left behind? I can't quite figure out why, who or what, but something was up.